Hi, I'm Chris Dixon. I'm here with Josh Koppelman and Omar Telez, the founder and CEO of Skedit. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what is Skedit?
We're an online social calendaring platform. A high-level concept is Twitter meets Tumblr on your online calendar, addressing three big issues we believe the internet is facing. A, there is a failure of the online calendar space. B, there's 16.6 million searches on things to do tonight. And C, there is a very competitive social stream.
Okay. And so what are some of the key challenges you're facing?
Sure. So we are 25 days away from starting beta and specifically 2 months away from launching. So questions for both of you regarding what advice, tips can you give us? So specifically, Josh, from your perspective, what do investors look for at beta? What are the key metrics that we should be focusing on?
So I think, look, investors are always going to be tempted and teased by sort of massive numbers, right? So you have a successful beta, that's just overall large numbers. But I think some of the real statistics that often sort of you could always generate a bump, right? You're going to launch, you're going to get your coverage on the blogs, you're going to be able to do your press hit and get a lot of people visiting your site once. The real question is the retention data and the cohort data, which shows sort of repeat traction and repeat usage. And I think it's really important that you instrument your site to sort of collect that data, because you might find that you get a whole bunch of people come on the first day, first week, but are they coming back? Are they engaging? There are a lot of tools, whether it's KISS metrics or RJ metrics, which actually make it really easy for you to track cohorts. And it's also important to figure out sort of, it's always, a mentor of mine once gave me advice, and when something like, there's nothing like numbers to fuck up a good story. And and the challenge about sort of launching beta is that you're going to instantly collect numbers. So instantly, sort of all of the investors' interest is going to be on those numbers. So you want to make sure that you have enough time between launch and raise that you might have to iterate
or raise before you launch
or
and
raise
sell the
before
dream and not the numbers.
We see that a lot too.
Okay. So retention and good Excel abilities to play around with the numbers. And Chris, from your perspective, you have had the wisdom of having been part of many betas. What, from an operating perspective, what things should we look at for? What are some lessons learned in order to have a good beta?
Well, I'm going to sort of echo some of what Josh said. I think I've become a big fan of the kind of the lean startup stuff. If you read, if you haven't, I'd suggest reading like Eric Ries and Steve Blank's blogs, and they have a book coming out soon, which is all about sort of this methodology of developing what they call a minimum viable product. So you sort of, if they say if you aren't embarrassed by your first product, you've launched too late or whatever, and then taking a heavily metrics-based approach and doing it, as Josh said, in sort of a cohort analysis way, where you're sort of saying, here's a user who came back and did the following things, and here's a user that we lost, and really understanding that, as opposed to sort of what they call kind of the vanity metrics, which are just kind of like the overall usage, which you can probably pump up with PR and other kinds of things, but really trying to understand, are you really getting sort of engaged, excited users, I think, versus just sort of false signals of early success.
Fantastic. So we're giving ourselves a month between beta finish and a month and a half between beta finish and launch. Do you guys think it's sufficient time to give to make tune-ups? Do you think we should be allowing some more?
What's your release cycle? How often are you how often are you pushing to production?
3 months release cycles, yes.
No, so it's not. Well, if you're launching beta and you're going live in a month and a half, and you won't have any time to release. So the goal of beta is to learn from the beta and then shift to production. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know where your product is. I don't know what type of testing you've had earlier, but.
You should basically, this is nothing to do with you specifically, but I think all companies basically should expect their initial beta to be wrong. You'll get a lot wrong. I've gotten a lot wrong for sure, and I think most entrepreneurs will say the same thing, and so you should expect that, and the most important thing is that you are prepared to learn from that and have the proper metrics and other kinds of things, and that you have a sort of a willingness and a ability to kind of rapidly iterate and improve.
And then back to the earlier point about, if we think about our launch, it was a question about the velvet rope. We've seen some tools that that enable that velvet rope situation of being invited and being in the list, or sort of if you get 3 of these. Any other tools that you can point us to, or your reactions to leveraging this velvet rope exclusive launch or by invitation only?
I think it's a good analogy. Is I live in New York City here, and yeah, Velvet Rope works for like 4 nightclubs or something, right? But for the rest of the world, like you don't, it's very, very hard to pull off, right? To pull off that kind of desirability. And, at the end of the spectrum, you have people out there, handing out flyers and wearing,
Placards.
placards in Times Square. So if you get the Velvet Rope, great. If you can get that effect, that kind of like that kind of desirability, that's great, but it's really hard.
Yeah. On that last note, Chris, if I could, around the Velvet Rope, we were thinking of launching around a specific event, New York Fashion Week, but of course that has its pros and its cons. One of the cons to me that there's a lot going on. We may get lost in the crowd. Your reactions to launching around a specific event, of course, a social online calendaring enabling that launch.
We've seen it work both ways. We've seen companies launch at South by Southwest and get drowned out, and we've seen companies launch at South by and get a lot of attention. I think a lot of it comes down to the quality of the product, what type of prep work you've done in terms of building relationships and events. But, at the end of the day, whether you launch at an event or not isn't going to ultimately, determine. It shouldn't ultimately determine the success of your product. I think, So I'm not sure I have a strong opinion either way.
Yeah, I think just generally though, if I'm I sound like a lean startup fanboy here, but I think probably people place too much emphasis on the launch and not, like oftentimes the launch you'll get a lot of traffic and then it'll go away if you don't have a great product, right? So, I would be thinking much more personally about how to build a organization where you're constantly learning and improving than I would about like specific launch events, but I don't know.